It wasn't that it was a bad dance, but it wasn't the best dance either. Not that I'm much of a dancer, of course, but let's lay our cards on the table, shall we? With the exception of a few guys who know what they're doing, and of course the posers, there aren't that many weirdos in the world, are there? Scylla, that is, my hostess, of course loved to dance, and we had an unspoken agreement that once she had a couple drinks with me and stepped on my feet a few times, I would be released. Then I could resume my acquaintance with the bar and the liquid pleasures behind it, and she would go off to dance with her buddies or other guys if she wanted. Now hold on. I know what you're thinking, and you can't help but think about it. I said dancing, and that's exactly what I meant. No funny stuff, no canoodling, and certainly none of that. In all the time we were married, I never once even suspected that Scylla might do something like that. So no problem, right? Is that so? What would you think of the current situation then? Scylla had been dancing with the same guy for the last half hour or more, and that wasn't normal, not by any means. 2 dances was fine, maybe even 3 if it was one of my buddies or something. But half an hour passed, and the bleeding still didn't return. What was going on? Maybe I was worried about nothing, but a slight wobble in my stomach told me otherwise. Here. The music was fading and it was coming back to me. But damn it, she didn't do it. The ripples in my stomach turned into a big square lump of lead, and for the first time in our 10 years of marriage, I felt a twinge of jealousy. Scylla was a cute babe, though even I wouldn't claim she was some kind of Miss World or something. A pretty enough boat, gorgeous Bristols and all, but perhaps her best feature were her pins. They were beautiful, long and slender, and it seemed as if they would go on forever. That's why, even at the age of 39, Scylla could still wear such short skirts when we went out for the evening. But she still danced with him, the same guy. 6 feet tall, a little skinny, with dark blonde hair. The complete opposite of my 5'10", dark hair and thicker build. What the hell did she see in that bastard? Jesus. This is probably the 6th or 7th dance they've done together. It's time for action. Getting up from the stool I was sitting on, I mumbled something to the people we were sitting with about going to look for the bathroom. I didn't want them to know I was worried about the hostess's behavior. Where were they? I was making my way through the crowd on the dance floor, trying to pick out the blue color of my wife's short dress. There they are, around the corner. My steps froze when I spotted the pair of them, my wife Scylla pressed against the blonde bastard as if they were glued together. Neither of them moved their feet hardly at all, they weren't dancing, but pressed against each other in place, Scylla's head resting on his chest. Oh, shit. Everything turned upside down inside me and I took a deep breath. It was wrong. It wasn't right at all. My Scylla had never done anything like that before. No, they weren't kissing, and Blondie's hands weren't in a place where they could slap him. Not yet. No. It's all about the way they held on to each other. And the fact that she was with him for so long. He said something to her and I heard her giggle, reach up and stroke his cheek. Too familiar, too familiar. Hi, Scylla, I greeted her, striding purposefully toward them. I was wondering where you went. Must, repeated the wife puzzled, looking back in my direction with a blank expression on her face. Where to? You've been gone for almost an hour, Scylla, I exaggerated a little, trying to contain my fervor. What are you up to? I saw the light dawn on Scylla's face as she returned to the real world. Oh, Ken, she said, gasping, almost helplessly freeing herself from the geezer's clutches. It's Dave, Ken. We were just dancing and chatting, that's all. Too long for my taste, Scylla, I insisted and held out my hand to lead her away. For one horribly long moment I thought she was going to reject him, and what I would have done then, I'm not at all sure. Probably hit someone. Yes, Ken, of course, Scylla murmured after some hesitation and gently reached out to me. May I finish the last dance, please, dear? The music has stopped, Scylla, I informed her briefly of the obvious. It stopped a few minutes ago. Oh yes, of course, Ken, she muttered in confusion. I'll be right there, dear, but I need to say goodnight to Dave. No good nights, Scylla, I insisted irritably. We're getting out of here, and I mean now. I was very angry, I can tell you that. Wait a minute, buddy, her new friend Dave started to interrupt, but one look from me and he prudently changed his mind. Now, Scylla, I repeated. Now, or I'll leave without you. Okay, Ken, Scylla replied, reluctantly letting go of the bugger lug. I'll see you sometime, Dave. Angry? What do you think? How would you feel? What the fuck do you think you're playing with Scylla for? I almost yelled at my damn missus as I dragged her back to the bar. Who was that damn guy? What were you doing with him? Nothing, Ken, Scylla fought back. Nothing at all, but it got me thinking, that's all. Thinking? Thinking? I think it was a lot more than thinking. Scylla stared at me intently, and I knew she had this habit of looking me in the eye. But not this evening, and that's for sure. We need to talk, Ken, she finally said quietly. Let's go home and we can talk. Not at home, Scylla, I exploded, recoiling at those dreadful words, which I had in no way expected to hear from my mistress. If we need to talk, there's no better time than now. Better at home when we're on our own, honey, she insisted, but I refused, urging her to confess while on the verge of a breakdown. All right, she agreed. But hear me out. I agreed, horrified at what she was about to tell me, but agreed, completely confused and wondering if the next few moments would sound the death knell for what I envisioned as our perfect marriage. This is not a sudden decision, dear, Scylla began. I've been mulling it over for a month or more, but the time has come, and I've decided to fulfill the promise you made to me. A promise? What bloody promise? I never promised you that you could keep it up with another man. The night before our wedding, Scylla reminded me. You made me a promise, and the time has come, darling. What promise? I muttered, feeling suddenly very, very empty inside. I don't remember any promise. But I lied. Oh, my God, how I lied. I made her a promise, just as she said, though I had put it out of my mind long ago. I think you remember, Ken, Scylla said quietly, avoiding my gaze. I'm sorry, darling, and I don't want to hurt you. I'll be 40 in a few months, but as much as I love you, I think it's time. Oh, shit. Oh, for Chris's sake, whatever made me make that promise? Let's go back a few years. Let's go back to the night I first met my Scylla. I mean we, of course, were in a small jazz club in South London, although at the time neither of us knew the other was there. There was a pause in the music and the people around me stood up to refill their drinks. How do I get rid of him, Anne? I heard the pretty girl standing right in front of me turn to her friend. I don't mean to be rude, but I really don't like him. He's gone to buy us drinks, Scylla, her friend told her. We can just leave without saying anything. I can't do that to him, the pretty blonde with long legs told her buddy. It's not that he's horrible or annoying or anything like that, I just don't like him. I looked at the girl and marveled at the sheer length of her slender leg that stuck out from under the hem of her miniskirt. Maybe I could help a girl with a pair of stilettos like that. I have to say that at that time I had been divorced from my first mistress for 2 years, and all I can say is that I was having the time of my life with the ladies. Hello you two, I murmured, leaning forward between them. May I offer my services? They both stared at me like I was someone from another planet. I overheard your words, I told them. I can help you with that. Pretend to be your boyfriend or something. I don't have a boyfriend, the pretty blonde protested. What does that have to do with you? Further conversation was interrupted by the appearance of a fellow lover who placed a tray of drinks in front of the two girls. In fact, I could see why the girls weren't thrilled with him. Ah! I dumbfounded him, choosing another way. This is for my sister and her friend? Yeah, I guess so, he replied nervously, looking at me uncertainly. And this must be for me, I continued, picking up the beer he had so obviously bought for himself. Thanks a lot, buddy. Bloody good of you. Your sister? The poor man asked grudgingly, watching his pint of ale begin to disappear rapidly down my throat. Yes, I replied with a smile. I'm here to take her home. Home? Repeated the enamored boy, his disappointment evident. Home, copied my newfound sister and her friend, equally surprised. Yeah, home, I continued nonchalantly, smiling at the pretty blonde. You promised your mom you'd be home early today. Sure, I was taking a risk, and judging by the look on her face, I was about to be shot down in a beautiful, glorious blaze, but a cocky creep like me has had worse failures. But then help came from another source. Give me a ride, please, Anne asked and began to gather her purse and belongings. Sure, Anne, I replied, surprising even myself by remembering her name, and stood up to escort them out, taking the blonde's hand as she hesitantly climbed up on her long slender legs. Thanks for the DRI. NK, mate, I addressed the hapless fellow, who was still standing there with a lost look, quickly draining the pint I just snatched from under his nose. Have a drink, girls, and thank the nice man, I admonished my young charges, which they did, mumbling words of thanks. It's time for us to go home. But, said the poor man. They're not little girls, they must be at least 20. Yes, but you can't be too careful these days, I teased him, somewhat unfairly, I thought. So unfair that I suddenly felt very guilty. Look, see that redhead over there with the big breasts and wearing tight jeans? Yeah, he confirmed, looking at the redhead, one of my occasional bed companions when I wasn't being too picky. The one with the nose ring and the tattoo on her left breast? That's her, I continued cheerfully, slipping a tenner into his hand. Go buy her a vodka tonic and tell her you're a friend of Ken's. Don't let her down, sunshine, no one does. Vodka and tonic, he repeated, slightly puzzled by the unexpected turn of events. That's it, I said, patting him on the shoulder. Buy one for yourself, too, now that you've got it. With those words, I led the two giggling girls away from the table, not wanting to look back. You cheeky bloodsucker, and laughed as we walked through the door. You pinched the poor man's beer. Nonsense, young lady, I replied with a smirk. I got him another one and set him up with Lily. That's right, Anne agreed. By the way, this is Scylla, and I'm afraid we're both closer to 30 than 20. It's okay, I replied. I'm over 30, so that's even better. At that moment, I pulled up in front of my car, a 6-month-old Jaguar supplied by my company, and their eyes widened slightly. Damn! That's exactly what I got it for. After all, I was their best salesman. Well, ladies, what's up? I asked them. Are you two going about your business, or are we going somewhere else to have another drink? A drink, Ken, definitely a drink, Scylla exclaimed, hardly the first time she had uttered those words. And looked at Jaguar, then at me, then agreed, and we set off merrily on our way. The rest of the evening went well and we had a lot of fun as a threesome. They discovered that I couldn't dance for peanuts, but that I was good company, and I discovered that they were not only cute, but smart. What surprised me was that at some stage Scylla embraced religion and went abroad as a volunteer straight after university. She didn't elaborate on why, but she became disillusioned with that life in her church and has only recently returned to the UK for good. I didn't care, I was never really into religion. A few very pleasant hours passed and we decided to call it a night. Everything went back to my Jag and I wondered how the evening would turn out next. They were both very attractive young girls and I didn't get to choose which one to stay with. The tall blonde with lush tits and legs to match the miniskirt, or the brunette with big bristles. Of course, I wouldn't have minded, but I didn't get the impression that a threesome was planned. Drop me off first, please, Ken, and spoke up, preempting my suggestions. It's on the way to Scylla. Well, it seems to be settled. We pulled up to Anne's house, and I jumped out of the car to open the door for her, acting like a mature gentleman. I walked her to the front door and went to say goodnight. For heaven's sake, I almost shook her hand. Thanks for tonight and everything else, Ken, and smiled, put her arms around my neck, drew my lips to hers, pressed her more than impressive breasts against me and almost swallowed my tongue from her mouth. Construction. After nearly 10 minutes, with hand-to-hand combat added to our repertoire, we finally came up for air. What's going on, Anne? I asked, enjoying but puzzled by her unexpected behavior. Why the hell did you first ask me for a ride and then start making out with me like this? Glad you asked, Ken, she said sadly. But last time you came to the bar, we flipped a coin, and Scylla won. Oh, I'm not often at a loss for words. Be careful with her, Ken, she leads a bit of a withdrawn life and isn't very experienced. Oh, my God. Maybe the wrong girl won me over. If it doesn't work out, don't forget me, and finished, and with one last smile, she stuck her tongue out, wriggled, and disappeared through the front door. We'll see, I thought. We'll see how the rest of my evening turns out. Exactly. Let's get back to Scylla. I jumped back into my Jag, started the engine, and sportily sped down the road, expertly shifting gears, wading through traffic, and trying to imagine myself as Sterling Moss or Jason Button. Between you and me, it was quite skillfully done, and just what he needed to impress a girl. Ken got the wrong direction, Scylla laughed. These girls know how to put you in your place, don't they? 15 minutes later, however, I was already standing outside her building, walking up the stairs, entering her apartment, and sitting on her couch with a drink in my hand. Not a bed, sorry, I meant to say not bad. So you don't have a steady boyfriend at the moment, I asked, confident that I was on safe ground. Ken hasn't had boyfriends for a very long time, Scylla replied wistfully. I had a couple of very casual liaisons at university and I've been in Africa ever since, and as a volunteer that wouldn't be welcome. So what went wrong? I asked. I don't want to talk about it, she replied a little sharply. But those who make the rules don't always know how to stick to them in their personal lives. And that was about all I got out of her on the subject. I hope you don't think you'll end up in my bed tonight, Ken, my lovely companion continued with a smile. I hadn't thought about it, Scylla, I replied, feigning offense and innocence. But since you brought it up. I left a comment unfinished and she told me I had no chance. Half an hour later, I was lying in her bed watching her strip off the rest of her clothes. I don't know which of us was more surprised, and I still don't understand how the evening passed so far and so quickly. Stop looking at me, Scylla said shyly, reaching behind her to unhook her bra. I don't stare, Scylla, I informed her. I stare, and I like it a lot. I've never undressed in front of a grown man before, she muttered, blushing furiously as she pulled her panties down her beautiful long legs. Well, aren't I the lucky one? I replied, grinning widely. I'm not used to this kind of thing, Ken, Scylla said firmly, slipping her beautiful naked body under the blanket and snuggling up against mine. Oh my God, it's so wonderful, just as in described. What? Hey, she said she wasn't very experienced, but Scylla was in her early 20s, and she was also a very attractive girl. You've never gone to bed with a guy before, Scylla? I asked incredulously. No, never. Have you ever made love? No, Ken, never. Are you telling me you're a virgin? Yeah, I guess it is. You do realize what's about to happen, right? I asked uncertainly, not used to this situation. Well, I was hoping we could have a bit of a romp with Ken, Scylla surprised me. I don't think I'm ready to go all the way to the end. But you're jumping into bed with me naked, I made my argument, somewhat stunned. Yeah, but I trust you, Ken, Scylla replied, leaning over and kissing me, and her warm, lush breasts pressed against my chest. You just seem like such a nice and trustworthy guy. Oh my God, Moses, how complicated can life be? Will I be a gentleman or will I remain myself? But before I could think about it, she was already on top of me and rubbing herself against me as hard as she could. Can I touch him, please? She giggled, grinning like a 12-year-old. I've never felt him before. Help yourself, sweetheart, I replied wisely. She's not going anywhere else this evening. That night we kissed and touched each other. To shorten the long story a bit, Scylla agreed to marry me after about 10 months, and by then we were living together. Way to go! And was to be her maid of honor, and my friend Elf was to be her best man, for he could tell jokes better than any of my other close friends. Scylla's parents were thrilled that their eldest daughter had finally found a man, and one who had already made his mark on the world, and my parents instantly fell in love with their future daughter-in-law. It's important to note that I was attracted to more than just sex, and I didn't make the same mistake I did in my first marriage. No. Scylla and I have many common interests as it is, and we've already tried out a few of them with great success. No. I didn't become a church regular or anything, but I went with them a few times and even happily agreed to a church wedding. Everyone was happy. Everything was perfect. Nothing could go wrong on this marvelous day. Like I said, we had been living together for a while by then, but Scylla's mom wanted us to go the traditional route and not see each other the night before the wedding. So Scylla packed her bag and went to Anne's where she would sleep, and the next morning they would go to her mom and dad's house to get ready for the ceremony. "Behave yourself, sweetie," I joked, knowing she was going out for drinks with Anne and a few friends that night. Sort of a low-key bachelorette party. "What do you think I'm going to do, you old fool?" my bride-to-be teased me. "It's not like we're going to a pub, not some male review bar." "I picked you up at the pub, don't forget, Scylla," I laughed, holding out my jacket to her. "There's plenty of other guys there who'd be happy to chat up a hottie like you." I expected her to laugh. Laugh or make some funny comment in response. But she didn't. No, she didn't do it. "Well, that won't happen again now, will it, Ken?" Scylla said with a strange note in her voice. "No more boys flirting with me from now on." "So you want other men to socialize with you, Scylla?" I asked cautiously. I wasn't too keen on where this conversation was going. "No. Of course not, Ken," Scylla replied immediately. Just. Oh, I'm silly Ken, just ignore me." "Do you really want to marry me, Scylla?" I demanded, grabbing her hand and pulling her to me. "You haven't changed your mind?" "No, of course not, sweetie," she replied, smiling at me and then reaching up to kiss me. "I'm just emotional and stupid." With those words, Scylla laughed softly, picked up her bag and headed for the door. "I'll see you at church tomorrow, Ken," she answered me. "I love you." The panic had passed. I pulled myself together and popped down to the pub for a sort of last pint of beer with my mates. I'd already had a stag party a few nights before, and remembering the state I was in after the first stag party before my previous marriage, I slowed down a bit. The evening passed pleasantly enough, with most of the talk being about Arsenal's recent magnificent win over Chelsea, how unlucky we were not to score a sixth goal, and the fact that the 2 penalties that somehow the referee, a blind goon, missed could have made it 8. By the time I got back to our house rather late, I had forgotten about that little spat with Scylla and was looking forward to a cup of tea in my bed. Dring 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 dring. The damn phone greeted me as I walked through the door. "Hello, Ken Thompson. Thank goodness you're finally here," and greeted me. "This is the 3rd time I've called." "What's wrong, Anne?" I asked, immediately worried about what had happened. "Is Scylla all right?" "She's fine, Ken, but you better get your ass over here as soon as possible." "Why? What happened?" cried out I in alarm. "Has there been an accident?" "No, not by accident," Anne replied. "But you need to come and deal with Scylla if you still want to get married in the morning." My stomach rumbled. Deal with Scylla? What the hell happened at her bachelorette party? As you can imagine, my thoughts went to the obvious. What the hell had she done and to whom? But Anne was no longer ceremonious and insisted that I put on my skates and drive to her place. My brain worked overtime, breaking more speed limits than it should have as I raced the 5 miles to Anne's small apartment. What happened? What happened? Where's Scylla? Is she all right? She didn't do anything stupid, did she? I peppered in with questions from the moment she opened the door for me, and only stopped when she handed me a cup of tea. Let's face it, unless you are British, it is difficult to explain the multifaceted power of a cup of tea. She's fine, Ken, I assure you, and finally admitted when I calmed down. She's in my bedroom and she's crying. Oh God, no, I muttered, assuming the worst and wondering what kind of guy she ended up with and what they were doing. Be honest with me, and, I'm begging you. How bad is it? What did Scylla do? Not so much what she did, Ken, she answered quietly. Rather what she didn't do. I could tell by the look on my face that I had no idea what she was talking about. Ken, and began slowly, not knowing how to explain. In the pub from the very beginning, as soon as we got there were groups of guys chatting to us all the time. 8 girls like us, dressed to the hilt, so I suppose they might well have thought we were all tipsy. So what did Scylla do to and demanded I, please, just tell me. I'm sure I can forgive her. It wasn't her, Ken, and continued. It was all of us. Well, everyone except June and Tina. June and Tina, I repeated, perplexed. Why were they different? They're married to Ken and they don't mess around. I stared at her blankly. It really didn't make any sense. Ken, she said rather loudly, like I was fat. We were all flirting with these guys and having a good time, dancing and making out until we fell over. And Scylla? No, Scylla just sat there and turned down offers to dance and stuff. I still don't understand, I protested weakly. How silly you men are, and went on. Don't you see, we were all having a great time, flirting and talking and everything. I let one guy touch me on the dance floor right in front of everyone for a laugh, and those two girls Marcy and Judy went off with a couple of them in the parking lot. I'm sorry, but I'm still lost here. She missed Ken's fun and said, frowning. Don't you see? You're practically the first real man she's ever dated, and it suddenly occurred to her that she could never know what playing the field was all about. Oh, shit. I remembered how anxious she had been before she left the house. I put 2 and 2 together, got 5, and felt sick to my stomach when I realized that what Ann was saying might be true. Oh, shit. We chatted some more, and filling me in on exactly what had happened and what Scylla had said. Finally, I gingerly opened the bedroom door and peered in nervously. Are you okay, Scylla? I asked timidly, looking at the unkempt pile lying on the bed. What are you doing here, Ken? She half-sobbed in response. Please go away. Not until we figure this out, honey, I insisted. There's nothing to deal with, Ken, she muttered. I can't go through with this. I'm so sorry. Maybe we should talk about it, dear. There's nothing to talk to Ken about, she replied. I just can't go through with it. I sat down on the bed and stroked her hair for a while, and I'll admit the thought that I should just get up and walk away from this problem kept crossing my mind. But not for long. It was at that moment that I think I truly realized how much Scylla meant to me. How much I had fallen in love with her, and how much I wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. I coaxed her for about 10 minutes or so when she suddenly sat up abruptly and hugged me, telling me how much she loved me. So what's the problem, honey? I demanded. We love each other, so let's get married. But what? I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. But you're the only man I've ever been with, Ken, Scylla sobbed miserably. What if? Well, you know. Are you saying you want to go to bed with someone else, Scylla? I asked, unsure of myself and not sure what she was thinking. Of course not, silly, Scylla replied, trying to grin. There's no one else here, and there never has been. So what's the problem, dear? What if someday that happens? What if I need to find out what another man inside me feels like Ken? What then? What then? What then? Is that your only problem, Scylla? I asked softly, kissing her cheek lightly. Yes, Ken, but that's some kind of problem, isn't it? Not at all, Scylla, I replied confidently as a completely stupid idea popped into my slightly beer-addled head. Scylla looked at me with a puzzled expression, and my heart nearly burst at the innocent hope that shone in her eyes. As a wedding present, I'll give you a get-out-of-jail-free card, I told her, referring to the game of Monopoly we often played. One slip up with some other guy and I'll forgive you. How about this? You can't be serious, Ken, Scylla shuddered. You couldn't. But I love you, honey, I continued, perhaps a little carried away by the theatricality of the whole situation. Of course, come to think of it, the 6 pints of beer I'd had earlier might have been involved here. One time, just one time, sweetheart, and I promise to forgive you. But Ken, I mean well. Sweetheart, I interrupted her, pulling her close to me. I intend to love you and adore you for the rest of your life, and you'll be so happy in bed you'll never be tempted, so that's not a problem for me. Oh, Ken. Oh, Scylla. I don't know exactly where Ann slept that night, but certainly not in that bed, and the next day Scylla and I were married as planned and became Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, with her mother completely unaware that her daughter had spent half the night preparing for her honeymoon. So, it's been quite a few years, and I can safely say that our marriage has been as good as you could imagine. 2 children, a boy and a girl, and 2 better babies could not be wished for. For the first few years, we occasionally invoked my promise when we were drinking or feeling a bit prudish, but it was always in good humor. At least that's what I always thought. But it's been many years since this topic was mentioned, it was almost forgotten, almost extinct. And then there was this dance, and my nightmare came into view in all its glory. Damn it! Damn it! What the hell was I gonna do? I think we'd better go home and talk it over like I suggested, Ken, Scylla whispered, taking my hand and really taking control, guiding me towards the exit. I'm sorry, sweetie, but it's all been building up inside me and there's no way it's going away. In a daze, I allowed myself to be let out of the club and back to our car. I didn't even know how to drive, and anyway Scylla left me no choice, sliding behind the wheel and turning on the ignition. It won't be that bad, honey, she told me, so gently. We'll work it out between us, and I promise it'll be okay. I wasn't sure about that, but I was so focused on holding back my tears that I couldn't answer. Back at my house, a more luxurious apartment than the one I had when we first met, we walked in, I was still in a daze, and paid the babysitter. Well, Ken, my loving wife began. Are you ready to discuss this, dear, or shall we leave it until tomorrow? Maybe you'll change your mind by tomorrow, Scylla? I ask. Ed. No, she replied firmly. I'm sorry, but I've already made up my mind. Then we'd better talk about it now, I suppose, Scylla, but for heaven's sake stop asking for forgiveness all the time. All right, Ken, Scylla replied calmly. I'm sorry. For God's sake, stop apologizing, I shouted at her. I can't take it. Yeah, I'm sorry, Ken, Scylla panted, looking at me anxiously. I'm sorry, but I can't help it. Screw this, I shouted, finally losing my composure. I'm going to bed. Do whatever the hell you want. Well. There was no decision? I was only postponing the awful moment of truth. Although Scylla retained the very innocence that first attracted me, I equally knew that she had a strength of character that did not tolerate bullying. I wasn't going to just stand there and let her overreach, let her get her way without a fight. But I promised. A lot of water has flowed off the bridge since then, but a promise is a promise. My spirit fell when I realized my marriage was on the precipice of a precipice. We had taught our children to trust, honor, obey, and all that stuff, and here I was at a crossroads when the person I loved most in the world asked me to keep a promise I had made to her. Oh, damn it. Oh, God damn it. The next morning was Sunday morning, and although Scylla still went to church frequently, she chose not to do so on this day. I spent the night tossing and turning, and at some point my wife got up, unable to sleep from my constant movement, and went to the spare bed. I knew she needed sleep like everyone else, but I wasn't encouraged in the slightest. A full English breakfast was waiting for me when I came downstairs, and that was enough to realize that her speech the previous evening had been planned. I received such favor only on special occasions, and I suppose to inform me that she was going to change me was considered special even in Scylla's brain. Where are the children? I asked Scylla, noticing the unusual silence in the house. They left with Ted and Andrea for the day, Scylla told me. They won't be back until early evening. I looked up at her, even stared at her, but she lowered her gaze, clearly very embarrassed. You were planning this, Scylla, weren't you? I asked. Yes, she murmured quietly. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say sorry again. Oh God, I'm sorry, Ken. I threw her a lewd look, and she opened her mouth again to say something, but didn't, just shrugged, lost in speculation. Look, Scylla, I know you're sorry and all, but what do we do next? I haven't changed my mind, Ken, Scylla went on. I meant what I said last night. It's something I just have to do, but I love you very much, honey, and I want to make your life as easy as possible. And how the hell are you going to get me to accept that another man was with my wife? I asked her. What are you going to do? Are you going to let me watch or something? If you want, Ken, Scylla surprised me. I know some men enjoy that sort of thing, darling. What? Of course, it depends on the guy, and I wouldn't want it to be the first time. Scylla, I said firmly, raising my voice considerably. I don't want you making love to anyone else, and I assure you, I certainly don't want to watch you do it. Oh, she replied uncertainly. I just thought you might want to. I don't want to, Scylla, I almost shouted back at her. Just thinking about it makes me sick. Some guys get a kick out of the idea, Ken, my wife gently tried to encourage me. I've read stories about it. I didn't, I reminded her. It's those stories you read. Where did you even get this stupid idea? No, Ken, honestly. It's been building up inside me for the last year or more, but I've been reading these stories to see if I could find a way to make things easier for you. For a few moments we looked at each other, wondering what to do next. Perhaps it would have been better if you had just gone and done it without even telling me, Scylla, I broke the silence. At least then I wouldn't have known anything and I wouldn't have had to go through that heartache. I couldn't do that to you, Ken, Scylla spoke again, holding out her hand to me. I couldn't just cheat on you. But what if I say no, Scylla? What then? Then I'll just have to cheat on you, I guess, she wheezed, squeezing my hand tightly. Please, Ken, if you love me, don't make me do this. I'm not forcing you to do anything, Scylla, I told her. Maybe not, darling, but you promised me, and our entire marriage was built on that promise. It was enough for me. Any man would have had enough. The woman I loved was going to make me a cuckold, and knowing her, I knew it would be hard for me to talk her out of it. I could have tied her up, threatened her, or done many other things, but where would that lead, one might ask? I was fucked. Let me think about it for a few days, please, Scylla, I asked grimly. Give me some time. Okay, honey, Scylla replied, a tear running down her cheek. But please don't drag this out too long, okay? For the next week I tried the old ostrich trick and literally buried my head in the sand, trying to pretend that the problem might go away if I ignored it. Scylla moved carefully around me, carefully watching what she said. Several times she started to say something and interrupted, and it didn't take much common sense to guess what was on her mind. I talked to one Ken, my wife said one morning at breakfast, after which she fell silent. With who? I nervously replied, hoping she was talking about a plumber to fix a leaky faucet or something else, anything but the obvious. Another man, Ken, she replied, her voice shaking and her hand shaking. I called Dave. You remember, the guy I danced with. Do you have his number, Scylla? Yes, he gave it to me that night. I sat and looked at her. The love of my life and the woman who was breaking my heart. Not Dave, please, Scylla, I insisted. Not him. Anybody but him. Why not him? She asked quietly. Why not Dave? He was cute, and I really liked him. I didn't like him, I lied to her for no other reason. You don't have to like him, Ken, Scylla replied, perking up a little. You don't even have to date him. Why not just go along with it and get it over with, honey? Not him, Scylla, I snarled, my self-control finally starting to loosen. If I ever met him again, I wouldn't be able to resist punching him in the face. I'm not prone to violence and am usually very calm, but the thought of how that rascal was treating my Scylla, how she was moaning beneath him with no clothes on, kept me awake. So you prefer someone else over Ken? I'd rather it wasn't Scylla. But you promised Ken, and now things have gone too far for me to back out, she continued. There's a guy at work I really like and he's always flirting with me, so I'm sure he won't pass up a chance like this. And how would I have kept from knocking him then, Scylla? It would have been just the same. Scylla sat pensive for a few moments before answering. What if I didn't tell you which of my co-workers was Ken? Then you wouldn't know. Oh yes, of course, Scylla, I answered her. And imagine the next corporate party we go to. I'm going to look at each of these guys and wonder which one you're attracted to. The first one who looks at me askew might get a reprimand in return. Please don't use the F word, Ken, Scylla admonished me. You know I don't like that kind of language. So what do you want, Scylla, shouted I, taking over my temper. An intimate relationship? A sexual relationship? Love? It's all so damn complicated, you know. If you want to go and spend time with someone else, then do it, but don't expect me to approve, and don't think nothing will change. Leaving Scylla sobbing at the breakfast table, I got up and left, unable to take it any longer. Nothing was said about it for the next few days, but our relationship began to crumble. Although we had never quarreled, we were constantly snapping at each other, and it took the children a while to realize that something was wrong. Something was going to happen, but I didn't think it was up to me. "Can we talk, please, Ken?" asked Scylla when I got home from work about the 5th day. "We can't go on like this, dear." "Okay," I agreed, hoping she'd finally come to her senses. "The promise you made to me all that time ago, Ken," Scylla began confidently enough. "When you gave it to me that night, I realized that you really meant it." Scylla stopped and looked at me with tears in her eyes, testing what my reaction would be, but all I could do was shrug helplessly and my stomach flipped. "I really believed what you promised me, Ken, that if the time came, you would allow me one little affair with another man." It relieved me of all the worries I had been having, and perhaps for the first time I realized that you really loved me as much as I loved you. You had to do it to make that kind of commitment. And then there was the cruncher. "Now you're saying you didn't mean Ken? Are you saying you lied to me to convince me to marry you, and that our whole marriage is built on lies?" "Oh, shit." I didn't lie to Scylla, I struggled to explain, not knowing myself what I was thinking at that moment. I could hardly admit that I was half pissed off that night after what she had just said. "I meant it, but I just didn't realize there would ever come a time when you'd ask. I guess I didn't think about the consequences." "Well, it's about time, Ken," Scylla said slowly. "I'm sorry, darling, but I just need to find out what another man is like while I'm still young and attractive enough." By this time we both had tears streaming down our faces, but Scylla didn't back down, and neither did I. "So what was it that so suddenly bought Scylla off?" I asked. "Why now, after all these years?" "It's not that unexpected, honey," she replied, wiping a tear from her eye and trying unsuccessfully to smile. "For years I've heard other girls at work talk about all the men they've gone to bed with and how different they are. All the married ones have been in bed with several different men, and some of them have been in bed with several different men since they got married." "And you approve of that?" I challenged her. "Of course not," she replied. "They were doing it behind their husband's back, and that's cheating. Besides, they didn't have a promise like I did, and their marriages weren't based on such a promise." "What if I go with another woman, Scylla?" I demanded, trying to talk some sense into her. "How would you feel? Would you be okay with that?" "No, I wouldn't, Ken," Scylla growled with an angry expression on her face. "That would be cheating, and I could never accept that. If you cheated on me, Ken, I'd leave you." "But you want to cheat on me, Scylla," I shouted back. "How the hell do you think I feel about some other guy seeing you naked in the first place?" "It's not the same, Ken," my wife shouted back, equally angry. "Why can't you see? Why are you being so difficult?" We yelled at each other for a few more minutes, and after I threw the desk lamp across the room, she went off to her room crying and calling me a lying, inconsiderate bastard. 20 minutes later I heard the front door slam as I was in the kitchen trying to salvage a casserole I found burnt, and I was pretty sure I wasn't going to get any help from Scylla that evening. This is it, thought I. If she comes back and is with some guy, then we're screwed. I'll demand a divorce. My mood didn't improve an hour later when the phone rang, and I ignored it for a while, certain it was Scylla messing with me by picking up some guy. But finally, when the call continued, I picked it up. "Hi," I replied sharply. "Ken." "It's Ann," came the reply. She was still my wife's best friend. "Yes, and what can I do for you?" I replied briefly. "Scylla isn't here." "I know, Ken," she replied. "She's here with me, in my house, and she's in a terrible state. It's her fault, not mine." "Maybe," Ken, and continued. "But I thought I'd better let you know she's here and not busy doing something else." I muttered a few words of thanks and felt the tension and rage drain from my tense body, thanking Christ, who, by the way, I still don't believe in, that Scylla hadn't done anything stupid. She told me what's the matter, Ken, and continued after a few minutes. "It must be terrible for you. It's Anna," I almost sobbed into the phone. "Could you try to talk some sense into her?" "I can talk to her, Ken, but I can see her side too, you know that." "Her side, her side?" "She wants to leave and cheat on me, and..." How can you see her side? How can you even? Ken, it's not what she thinks, and told me calmly. She genuinely believes your promise was sincere, and doesn't understand why you think she's being unreasonable. What do you think, Anne? Was my only possible question. Do you think she's intelligent? Well, yes and no, Ken, she replied. But I know she was so comforted by your promise on the day of the wedding. She was in such turmoil the day before that I'm not sure she would have gotten through it, poor girl. She told you, I asked, completely stunned by her statement. Scylla told you about what I said the night before our wedding? Yes, Ken, and she was so happy about it. She's talked about it a lot since then, and I got the impression that you both discussed it from time to time. Lord, no one, replied I. She teased me a few times in the early days, and I joked about it too. But the subject didn't come up for years until Scylla brought it up the other day. Oh, dear Ken, and sympathized. Scylla has spoken to me quite often about it over the years, and especially during the last year. I got the impression that she had been preparing for it, but I didn't assume that you didn't know, and for that matter, I don't think Scylla imagined that you would react the way you did. I think she genuinely thought you'd accept it if she explained everything beforehand. So what am I supposed to do, Anne? I pleaded. If she goes for it, I don't think I can survive it. What are we going to do? You know what she's like, Ken, and reminded me. With her religious background, Scylla has very firm, unshakable notions, and to her, a solemn promise is a promise to keep. If she fulfills it, I can understand how you'll feel, but if you stop her, she may never trust you again. So my marriage has failed. No matter what I do, I complained unhappily, not knowing where to go next. I'm adrift without a paddle. You could go to some counselor, Anne suggested. You know, one of those marriage helpers. And where the hell am I going to find one of them at Anne's first request? I don't get the feeling Scylla's going to stick around much longer. That's right, Ken. Scylla's just ready to climb lampposts over this. She still loves you very much, but she feels like you're being unfair. Like you're cheating her out of something. Oh, my God. I can't win, can I? Maybe I could help Ken, Anne interjected. I've known you both for some time now. It was like grasping at straws, but I accepted her offer, agreeing to have Scylla stay the night at Anne's, and the next day they returned to our house for a council of war of sorts. I can say that I wasn't looking forward to it. Hi, Ken, and called out the next day as they entered the house. Hi, honey, Scylla added, already much more subdued. We hesitated, not knowing whether to give each other a welcoming hug. I finally took her in my arms to kiss her, but she turned her cheek toward me. That's a damn good start, I remarked angrily, pushing her away from me. I'm sorry, honey, she replied. I don't know what made me do it. Stop fighting, and told us, taking charge. Ken sits here and Scylla sits over there. And then briefly outlined the situation as she saw it, while Scylla sat there looking unhappy, but perhaps not as unhappy as I was. Then she let us both speak. Scylla said that she took the promise seriously, and that, considering that I was practically the only man who had ever kissed her, I must realize how important it was to her. She felt that it would be unfair of me to renege on my promise just because it had taken her so long to make it. She was still very much in love with me, although my behavior over the past few days had shocked her somewhat, and she doubted whether I really still loved her. After all, it's just sex, she finished. Just to see how the other man feels. It won't affect my feelings for my husband in any way. Your turn, Ken, and said. Try to be brief. I will, I replied, trying to remain calm. I'll admit, I made a promise, but I never believed it would happen. But that's not the point. The thought of another man making love to my wife makes me nauseous. If you want me to, I've changed my mind, and I won't stand by and accept what you want to do. Then I shut up before I said something stupid, and immediately wished I hadn't told her I still loved her. Then I'm just obsessed, Scylla objected. You can't stand the thought of another man taking advantage of your precious bloody property. That's not fair, Scylla, and intervened before I could put my paddle in. I think you should apologize to Ken. He doesn't want me to apologize. That's what he told me, she replied, and things got out of hand again as I couldn't resist calling her a stupid cow for her stupid remark. Shut up you two, and reassured us. If you're going to keep this up, you might as well get a divorce. Divorced? Divorced, sobbed Scylla, jumping to her feet. I don't want to be divorced. I love Ken and I don't want to leave him. Then sit down and shut up, Scylla, and told her. Or that's exactly where you might end up. Having calmed down at least partially, and continued. Can you agree to this, Ken, sometime? She asked. At least once, anyway? I can't imagine one, Anna, I told her. How do I know that once will be enough for her? That's a good question, Ken, and replied. Have you thought about it, Scylla? No, not really, she murmured back. But it'll just be sex and only once, just like he promised me. What if you develop feelings for another guy, Scylla, continued Anne. But I wouldn't with Anna. It would only be once and only for sex. What, no candlelit evening dinner, Scylla, continued Anne. No handshaking and kissing and all that nonsense? I don't find that very attractive, Scylla. Scylla lowered her face into her hands and thought for a moment before answering. Well. Yeah, I guess I was expecting a bit of romance beforehand, and I can't imagine having sex with someone without kissing them and stuff. It wouldn't be very pleasant. So it's a quick dinner, a pawing in the parking lot, and then going back to his house to snuggle in bed? I threw that in sarcastically, sliding the knife in. No. No, Scylla sobbed. Not like that at all. I want a man to seduce me romantically and leisurely. You've read too many damn magazine articles, you stupid woman, I replied. That's not fair, Ken, and interjected. Women don't think the same way as men. If Scylla is only going to do it once, it's her only chance, and she wants it to be like a fairy tale. And then go back to boring old me, you mean? I shot back angrily and we all sat there looking at each other. And continue our boring old sex life like we used to. Is that your main problem, Ken? Asked thoughtfully. What? I snapped back. That Scylla will compare you to someone else. That she'll accidentally find someone who's better in bed than you. With a sinking heart, I realized that and had grasped the main problem. Not the only one, of course, but a big one that no guy could handle. It occurred to me, I whispered my confession. How would you feel, Scylla? She turned to my wife. If this new guy gave you pleasure more times than you've ever experienced with Ken? If he had given you an evening the likes of which you could never have imagined? Would you be able to forget him? Would you be able to go back and be as happy as you used to be with Ken? That, I'll tell you, knocked me off my game. But before I could say anything, all hell broke loose. Now you're both jumping on me, Scylla shrieked, jumping to her feet. Neither of you realize what I've been through. None of you realize how much I need to know what another man is like. I thought you would understand me, Anne. I thought you were my friend. I'm Scylla, and protested. I'm just trying to. She only had time to yell to Scylla before she pounced on her with a hammer and tongs. Shut up, both of you. I yelled at both of them, jumping to my feet. I've had enough of this nonsense. Both women stopped talking and stared at me open-mouthed. In all the time we'd known each other, neither of them had ever seen me react so angrily. I've made up my mind, I told them, and my voice dropped to a reasonable level again. I'm not putting Ken off, Scylla snorted. You promised. Yes, I confirmed, looking into her eyes. And we've always raised our children to keep their promises, so if it's that important to you, Scylla, then I'll keep mine. There was a stunned silence. They both stared at me in amazement, hardly believing what they had just heard. Oh, shit, muttered in faintly. Are you serious, dear? Scylla asked cautiously. You really mean it? Yes, Scylla, I really mean it, I replied with far more confidence than I felt. You want to spend time with another guy, Scylla, then go ahead and do it. Enjoy yourself. Get a lot of pleasure out of it. And you don't mind? Asked Scylla doubtfully. Of course he bloody well doesn't mind, Scylla, and cut in before I could reply. He hates the very idea of it. Stop torturing him. But will you let me do it? My wife sought reassurance. Yeah, I said I'd do it. And you'll forgive me after that, dear? That's what I promised you, isn't it? But why Ken? She asked me. Why did he change his mind so suddenly? Because I suddenly remembered how much I love you, Scylla. It made her perk up a little. Do you really love me enough to let me have sex with another man and forgive me, honey? Scylla shuddered, a new tear streaming down her cheek. And you're still going to love me after that? I promise to forgive you, Scylla, I replied, choosing my words carefully. Whether I'll love you afterward will have to be seen. I don't understand, Ken. I promised to forgive you all these years, Scylla, I reminded her. But I didn't and couldn't promise that I would continue to love you. Such a thing is simply impossible to promise. How the hell do I know how I'll feel when you come back to me having slept with some other guy? Here. I'd play my trump card and see how it would end. But Scylla didn't realize it yet. I'll make it quick, Ken, I promise you, darling, she said softly. Just this once, I promise you. Take your time, Scylla, I replied calmly. Take your time. Maybe you'll find that guy, Dave, that you liked, if you want to. Have a proper romance. Tighten up for as long as you want and get it all out of your head. And you don't mind? Demanded Scylla, her face creased. She was beginning to worry. But not that worried yet. I didn't say I wouldn't mind. It's just that I'd forgive you, but don't you dare tell me about it, who it is, where you're meeting him, how good the sex is. I don't want to know anything about it. I don't ever. Just tell me when it's over, however long it takes, and we'll see how we feel about each other and if we have a future. After I've officially forgiven you, of course. But I'll still love you, honey, Scylla exclaimed. You're the only man I'll ever love. You don't know that, Scylla, I told her sadly. None of us know how we're going to feel. With those words, I stood up, grabbed my coat, and headed for the door. Where are you going, honey? Scylla exclaimed. To pick up Scylla's children, I replied. I'll leave them until later tonight. You'll have a chance to call privately if you want to. Scylla just leaned back in her chair with a blank stare, but then jumped up and grabbed me as I was leaving the house. You're either an insensitive idiot or a goddamn genius, Ken, she blurted out to me. Maybe I'm both, I smiled weakly. I hope everything works out for you. Anne grimaced. I understand what you're up to, trying to scare her with the consequences, but I don't know if it will work. I hope so, Anne, I replied grimly. I just have to hope so. Scylla and I went on with our lives, trying to pretend that nothing had changed. But it had, and sometimes the atmosphere was stifling. I didn't treat her any differently and never checked up on her, figuring it was her decision to start something, even though I might as well have finished it. At least we didn't snap at each other, but the lack of conversation between us was almost as bad. I relaxed a bit, confident that I knew my wife well enough to realize that she wasn't up to anything. But my hopes were dashed when my so-called knowledge turned out to be correct. Coming home from work one night, I couldn't figure out what was wrong, but I just knew something was different. She wasn't more confident, happier, sadder, but she was different, almost more distant. I guess she had a date with someone, but of course I couldn't ask her, although as Friday night approached it was becoming all too obvious. I'd decided to go out tomorrow night, she informed me on Thursday, pretending to cut vegetables so she wouldn't look at me. Fine, I replied without looking up. Enjoy. Aren't you curious where I'm going, Ken? She demanded. Not really, I replied, this time raising my eyes to her. Unless it's something I need to know about. Scylla put the knife down, stood silent for a few moments, then turned and silently left the room. Shit. Things didn't seem to be going according to plan. Friday went by like a blur, and I argued over nothing with a few co-workers at work. It wasn't their fault, of course, but then neither was it my fault for the situation. Except that it was partial, of course. Maybe it was all my fault. When I arrived that evening, Scylla was already home, and my dinner was ready to put in the microwave later. There was even a bottle of decent red wine on the table, already open and breathing. The expression "a condemned man has a hearty breakfast" came to mind, and while I doubted I would be able to eat most of the meal she had prepared, I had no doubt that the wine would not last long. "Hi, honey," Scylla greeted me as she came down the stairs. "Have you seen the wine I left for you? Is it the right one?" "That'll do," I replied grumpily. Damn it, she looked beautiful. Not too sexy or slutty or anything. Her dress was short, but not too short. Scylla just looked beautiful, and I had to turn my head away as I gasped. "Then I'll go, Ken," Scylla announced quietly. "I'll be back before midnight." "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Scylla?" I asked, though it sounded like nothing more than a quack. One last attempt to talk her out of it. "I have to, honey," she whispered back to me. "But don't worry, honey, I don't plan on going all the way tonight. I'm just going to see if I'm comfortable dating another man first. That should make me feel better, shouldn't it?" My anger began to build again. "I guess not, honey," Scylla murmured back, leaning over to kiss me goodbye. "I should get going." "Save the kisses for your lover," I growled, turning to face her to avoid her embrace. Scylla raised her head in surprise, stared at me silently for a few moments, then turned and headed for the door. "Enjoy yourself," I shouted wryly at her. I sat there wondering where I had gone wrong. What else could I have done? It was the 21st century, and the days of a man pulling his woman's hair and physically subjecting her to his will were long gone. It was her decision, but what I did after that would remain mine. I would forgive her, at least formally, though I knew in my heart that I couldn't really. What was going to happen? A quick divorce or a slow plunge into some kind of marital hell? I didn't know, but I was sure I'd find that bastard Dave, and if he really did accept her advances, one way or another the bastard would pay. What would I do to her? God knows. Probably nothing. She'd go into shock to find that one day I wasn't around anymore, even though deep down I knew I still loved her so much that it would hurt me as much as it would hurt her. And, of course, the kids. Damn it. Damn it and blow. How can life be so cruel? The sound of the front door closing threw me off balance, and I wondered why it was taking her so long to leave the house. But the sound of the door closing meant she was really gone. Gone to meet another man. I felt the black cloak of misery descend upon me again. Then I heard the door to the living room open, and turning around I saw Scylla standing there with tears in her eyes. "You promised to forgive me, didn't you, Ken?" She half sobbed. "It was a promise," I replied cautiously, wondering why she hadn't left yet. "Then can you forgive me for being such a stupid, inconsiderate, bitchy wife, please, Ken?" I stumbled over my words. "I guess you can." "I couldn't do it, Ken," he blurted out. I opened the front door and physically couldn't cross the threshold. It suddenly came to me what I'm going to do to our marriage and what I'm going to do to you, honey. I don't want to date another man, Ken, and I can't believe how stupid I've been. All I want is for you to love me. You still love me, don't you, Ken? More than Eve. I gasped, jumping to my feet and enveloping her in a hug. More than ever, darling. And you forgive me, my dear? Quite right, sweetheart. I told you that night before we were married that I would love and adore you forever, and I meant it. Remember what else you promised me that night, sweetheart? Scylla whispered hoarsely in my ear. That you'd make me so happy in bed that I'd never be tempted? The bell is ringing, Scylla. Then why don't you take me upstairs right now and fulfill the promise you made to me, she continued. And I'll promise you to never, ever mention another promise again. I grinned, took her hand, and led her toward the stairs. Scylla and I were about to start the first day of the rest of our lives, and things were good again at the Thompson house. Thank you, Lord. I forgot I'm not supposed to believe in him, am I? I love the happy ending. We apologize to all those who love to see a woman boiled alive, but this story just didn't happen. No doubt some of you will let me know what you think.